Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Early Modern Age Ottoman Empire Part 2. Before we dive into more details, let's briefly summarize the incredible journey of the Ottoman Empire. So, a small town in Anatolia grew into an empire that spread across the North Africa, Tunisia, Egypt, Asia, the Middle East, and parts of Europe, including the modern day Greece, Hungary, and Balkans. At one point, all of these were part of Muslim world. Now let's look at the map here, and then color coding shows the borders of the Ottoman Empire over time. So if we see the red lines, it's going to show us the highest maximum boundary of Ottoman Empire at its greatest extension. And then if you look into the brown color, that was the Anatolia, that area. So Ottoman Turks were there. Then it spread into this orange area. After that, we see how it started growing this side, the yellow part, and then the purple areas. Okay, it was conquered in the time of Mehmed II, and then we'll look into the time of Selim the Green, or actually Selim I. So that's the time the green part, like lighter green area, and Suleiman the One was Magnificent Suleiman, and that time it spread all over this part we can see here. So eventually, this is a map that I just want you guys to have in your in your mind. And if we look into that, so this is a small little city here that's called, in the map, it says Istanbul, but we are going to come back and talk about this situation here. Okay, so last week we discussed the humble beginning of Ottomans with Osman and Ertugrul. And this week, we will focus on the descendants of Orhan and the early expansion of the empire. So, by 1451 CE, the Ottomans had conquered almost all the lands surrounding by the Constantinople. So this is the Istanbul. Before conquering this city, it used to be called Constantinople. So surrounding all the lands were conquered by the Ottomans already. The last major Christian stronghold in this region was this Constantinople. This small city would become the focus of one of the most important events in Islamic history. This conquest fulfilled a prophecy of a Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam almost 700 years after his passing. And it marked a significant turning point at the true beginning of the global influence of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, sorry. Okay, now if we look into here, now military and political expansion, let's talk about it a little bit. So first 200 years of Ottomans, what they did, they actually fought against the Crusaders and Mongols, as I was saying last week as well. Now, then, after Selim the Green, we haven't been there, but we are going to talk about. I'm just trying to explain the map here still a little bit more. So during the Selim the Green, they conquered more of like a Jerusalem, Makkah, Medina, Asham, Greater Syria, and all that part. After capturing these key Islamic cities, they officially took the title of Khalifa. Until that, Osman and his successors, the title was Bey. They would call Osman Bey, they would call Ertugrul Bey, right? They would call Orhan Bey, but then later on they would call themselves Sultan, but they never claimed Khalifa. And Salim also expanded the Ottoman Empire into the Safavids territory. If you remember, in our Middle Age, we were talking about the Safavids Empire that time, same time, right? And what Selim did, he was claiming that he was removing the Shia control and restoring the Sunni authority. And this provided a religious justification for some of his conquest. Also, we are going to also talk about Suleiman the Magnificent later on and his golden age, 300 years after Ertugrul, and the Ottomans reached their peak under Suleiman the Magnificent, who ruled for actually um, 45 or 50 years, 45 years actually. His reign is considered the golden age of the Ottoman Empire. Now, after Suleiman, we are going to talk about his grandson. However, 1600 to 83, from 1900, 1914, the empire slowly began to decline and lost a lot of its territories, eventually becoming a modern day Turkey under a secular ruler. Okay, so before we like like we jump into more details, I have to say that it is important to be honest when we are discussing any history, and especially as a Muslims, we have to be honest, and same in any time we're describing any facts. So when it comes to the Ottoman Empire, it had its good, it had its bad sides. While they did many great things, some of their actions were really highly controversial. They were not perfect. Okay, we are humans. We are not beyond criticism. We are not beyond limitations. So one of their major criticism is the usage of janissaries. What is a janissaries? I'll talk about that. But janissary crops were one of their criticism. Harsh policies towards royal family members and political tactics that were sometimes really unethical. So, we're not going to, I'm not going to cut or hide or sugarcoat the history, and this was the true for most empires. So, same thing happened with Ottomans. So, we are gonna before we get into it, so let's talk about a little bit of their religious identity of the Ottoman Empire. So their ethnicity was Turkish nomads. They were a Turkish nomad lands. Spiritually, they were Sufi in their practice. In terms of fiqh, they used to follow the Hanafi fiqh. In terms of Aqidah, they were Ashari Aqidah. And also we have to remember that Ashari Aqidah is also part of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which is a legitimate Aqidah for Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So this actually helps explain why the Hanafi madhab became so dominant around the world. Because same time when Ottomans were ruling, they were following Hanafi fiqh, and the Mughals in India, they were also following Hanafi fiqh. So, automatically, most part of the Islamic countries, they were using the Hanafi fiqh. So, little bit in Spain and North Africa, over there, the Maliki fiqh was there. Indonesia and Malaysia was mostly Shafi fiqh, and some part in Hanbali fiqh that is really very recent. So it gives you a little bit of background how we see mostly Hanafi fiqh is widespread among the Muslims world still now. Now let's talk about Orhan's reign. So Orhan was the son of Osman. He ruled for 35 years, he continuing his father's mission. So now let's focus. I'm going to go into a little bit details. So we first talked about how Ertugrul Bey, his son Osman, was the third son of Ertugrul. He became the ruler. And then after Osman, Orhan. So for Orhan, he was expelling the Byzantines from the Asia. He modernized his army. He was advancing in technology, in knowledge, and weapons. So with the help of his brother, actually his older brother, Alauddin, he served as a chief advisor and a religious scholar. Okay, he really introduced, so Orhan really introduced progressive policies and strengthened the empire. And also we have to think about that Osman, because he was a third child of Ertugrul, probably he understood that just because Alauddin is the elder brother, he's not going to make Alauddin next leader. because Alauddin's characteristics were more of like, he was more of like a scholar. He was more of like a religious. He is knowledgeable. His strength was there. But Orhan's strength was more into leadership. So he pushed Orhan for being the leader and Alauddin as a chief advisor and religious scholar. So Orhan focused mostly on removing the Byzantium presence in the Asia Minor. He launched a series of assaults against them. He ruled for 35 years, extended the Ottoman kingdom greatly during his period, and he was also responsible for modernizing the army and his empire. Okay, so let's go. So Osman and his son Orhan were really winning land from Byzantines. The city of Basra, and they made it their capital city. And the Ottoman army advanced into Europe, but they have always left villagers untouched. Okay, non-Muslims were given the freedom to practice their religion as long as they don't rebel against the Ottoman rule. So we know this in Islam. It is a rule that when Muslims army they go and try to conquer another land, spread Islam, they have to give first the dawah to the leader. They have to tell them, become a Muslim. If they reject that, no, we are not going to become a Muslim, then they will say, okay, then give us jizya. It's called jizya, just like a tax system that here. However, if you pay us jizya, then we will give you the safety. Then you're not going to rebel against us. We will protect you from other threat, and you are not required to serve in Muslim army. Okay, so they were given freedom to practice their religion as long as they don't rebel against the Ottoman rule. So another thing I really wanted to mention in this time, it's called millet system. What is a millet system? It is a fascinating thing. I would say it is called a religious tolerance example, a beautiful example of religious tolerance, because these actually started in the time of Spain when the Umayyads were having an Al-Andalus. This practice was there as well, that the religious minority, they used to practice freely, like the Jewish and the Christians. They could follow their own religion, they could practice, they had their own worship places and everything. So what the Ottomans did, they actually formalized that concept, and they made, it's called millet system. So it will allow minorities, non-Muslims, to practice freely. Christians and Jewish, they would follow, for example, they would follow their own laws. So they will have a separate villages, okay, among the country, separate villages. Let's say this would be a Christian village. So that's where they will have their wines, their peaks, their churches, their synagogue, all these things. They're going to be the judging among those people will based on their own religious law or faith or whatever, okay? And the same thing for the Jewish. So they will have a Jewish land and Jewish villages. So they will have their, whatever they follow, they believe they're going to have that. So actually, without the Ottomans, if you read the history, it's not possible that the Judaism would be still alive. Okay, it was only possible the Judaism is still alive because the Ottomans, they protected the minorities, they protected the Jewish as well, and they gained the trust and the loyalty in return. So this was a win-win situation. So now this was a good thing, right? I found it a very fabulous example of the tolerance between minority group and the other groups as well. Now, the early Ottomans really adapted an attitude to peaceful relations with other Muslim empires and really focused their effort against the Christians and the Mongols. So during the early time of Ottoman, they were not the only Muslim empire. Okay, so they were still the same time. There were Safavids, there were Mughal Empire, there were Mamluks. So early time when Ottoman was rising up at this time, Ottoman sultans, they adapted the attitude that, you know what, we're going to have a peaceful relationship with our other Muslim empires. We're not going to fight with each others. Now, Janissaries. What is a janissary system? And I know whenever you guys are going to read about Ottomans or you're going to talk with some other non-Muslims or other people, they're going to attack on this topic. And you really need to understand, where as the Muslims or as a Muslim Ummah or Muslim empires, whatever they did was controversial or not right. So in order to avoid disunity, Orhan had Christian boys taken and raised as Muslims. These boys would become the scholars, military leaders, and governors and personal army of the Ottoman Sultan. So, what is it? Let's talk about a little bit more, okay? Now, those Christian and Jewish orphans or poor children, they were taken. They would bring them in the palace. They would raise in a palace with a very high education, with a very high military training. They would become elite soldiers, very loyal to the Sultan because they would be raised in a palace of Sultan. They had no one. They didn't have any tribal connection. They didn't have a parents. So they had only Sultan as their loyal master. Okay. Now, was it ethical? Now, some argue that they were saved from poverty. They were raised in a better condition. Others argue that Islam does not allow forced conversion, right? Now, the Ottomans used a fatwa to justify it, claiming that these orphans were part of war booties. So, you know what? They are our legitimate slaves. Only Allah knows how halal this system was, and we're not here to judge or say anything as long as you know this actually happened. Yes, this happened. Um, these children were taken from Christian or Jewish or other religious land. They were poor, or they were not meeting their end meets by their parents, or they were orphans. And were they given proper treatment? Yes, they were given proper. They were like given the extreme training, knowledge, and they were highly paid. They were personal army of Ottoman sultans. So they became the backbone of the Ottoman Empire, actually. Okay, so Sultan really relied on the Janissaries. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. Now, Sultan the Murad I, okay, so he took over empire after the Orhan I, and he was the first to expand the empire into Europe. And he actually changed the title from Bey to Sultan. Okay, before that, they would call themselves Ertugrul Bey, Osman Bey, Orhan Bey. But when Sultan Murad I took over, he actually called himself Sultan. He focused on expansion into Europe, and he led the largest European expansion in Islamic history. Okay, mostly his reign was against European expansion. The Byzantines started to actually pay a tribute to him because when he expanded, he included Albania, Bosnia, Serbia, part of Algeria, like that include, and these all came under the Muslims' rule during the Murad's his reign. And Byzantine really began to paying tribute to keep a peace, and that actually shows a clear sign of Ottoman power in that area, because Constantinople was still there. They did not lose, but they were trying to send a lot of gifts, a lot of money, and all these things to the Murad, just to keep a peaceful relationship with the Muslims around the Muslims' power. All right, so I hope until this is not too complicated, let's move to our next slide here. Now, what was happening? So after Murad was succeeded by his son Bayezid. And Bayezid, they used to call him Thunderbolt. Bayezid besieged Constantinople, but he was unable to conquer it. So what he did really prematurely, he ended the peace treaty with Byzantinians. And you know what? He suffered a major defeat. Because until that point, Constantinople, it's in the middle of, just give me a second here. I'm going to stop share here. Okay, so let's come back. Sorry for the technical difficulties in the middle. So what happened? So Murad was succeeded by his son Bayezid. So Bayezid took over the power after Murad was gone, and now Bayezid, he prematurely ended the peace treaty with the Byzantines, and he suffered a major defeat. Now, Bayezid's reign was really sad, and it really ended badly. And Ottoman Empire actually almost ended during his reign. Now, let's talk about a little bit what was going on that time. Well, if we go to our next slide, maybe we'll have a little bit more idea. So this is a guy, his name is Timur the Lame. He was known as Tamerlane. He's known as Tamerlane in Western books. He was a Mongolian ruler who wanted to bring back power to the Mongols. So he wanted to take over the power from the Mongols, from the Mamluks, from the Mughals in the India. So he really conquered many lands, including India and other parts in Asia, and brought them under Mongolian ruler. He organized a rebellion against Bayezid, and he was really brutal. People used to call him really bloodthirsty, and this led the Battle of Ankara. Okay, now when the Battle of Ankara happened, a huge battle took place between the Timurids and the Ottomans. Timur had a very strong army, a horseman, and this gave them an advantage over the footmen of Ottoman Empire. Okay, Timur's army also was larger in number, and they were victorious. Bayezid was really enslaved and died in a few months later. So what happened to Bayezid? So he lost, definitely we understand, he lost the Battle of Ankara. He was captured, caged, just like a zoo animal, and later he died in captivity as a slave. So this defeat nearly destroyed the Ottoman Empire, nearly, absolutely. And after that, what really happened? So let's go before that. Let's see here. So this border of Persian Empire around the Red One, 1600. This is a border of Persian Empire at that time. Ottoman Empire around 1700 would be all these light purple area. Ottoman Empire around the 1500 would be this darker area. So Turkey and Istanbul and all the parts in this side. Okay, just to give an idea what we are actually talking about. All right, so where we are right now, we still haven't conquered the Constantinople yet, right? So we are still all the lands around the Constantinople was conquered by the Ottoman Empire in that time, but not the Constantinople yet. So now these are some important dates. I think you might be able to. You might find little helpful. Here, the Seljuks entered the Baghdad, 1100 years almost, and then Seljuk defeated the Byzantines in Manzikert. So we covered all these in our Middle Age. Crusaders captured the part of the Palestine. The Mongols invaded the Seljuk lands in 1200 to 1300 at that time, and 1300. So Osman I was the Sultan, 1326. Mehmed II became the Sultan in 1451, and Ottomans captured the Constantinople. So we are still in this part, okay? So Bayezid came before Mehmed II. So we are still before 1400, that era we're talking about, okay? Now let's move on. Now what happened? Aftermath of the Ankara. So the enslavement, eventually, the death of Bayezid led to a really breakdown in the Ottoman Empire. His sons each took over a separate city. They tried to establish their own kingdom. So it ended up, the empire broke into small kingdoms, and this Bayezid had four sons because they didn't know who's going to be the next king. Bayezid never had a chance to choose anybody. There was no system set up that actually how they're going to choose a next leader. They thought it has to be their own family member. It has to be in their kingdom. In Islam, originally, it's not like it has to be somebody from that family, but eventually that's what was established. Okay, now An 11-year of civil war between them broke out, and this almost destroyed the Ottoman Empire. The four sons fought for control, a period of 11 years of civil war. So what is a civil war? As if I say, so civil war, when the people in between in a city or in a country, they are fighting each other. So that is a civil war. Civil war means you are fighting with your own country people. So when these all people are fighting each other, this four brother had their own little army or own little people who follows them. So they were all fighting each other. So eventually, Bayezid's son Mehmet, he was victorious over the brothers and united the kingdom, and he reestablished the Ottoman Empire. So let's pause here, do some final reflection, and with this final reflection, I'm going to end with our part 2. We see a repeating pattern in Muslim history. After the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we had a rapid expansion in the time of Omar and Uthman. And then there was a civil war in the time of Ali. Then, we didn't have any growth. And then again, in the time of Umayyad, we have seen our growth. And again, in the time of Abbasids, we have seen a little bit of growth. Again, in this side, after many years, we have seen the same thing in Ottoman Empire. There was a rapid expansion at the beginning, but whenever they had a civil war, they didn't have any expansion. And then later on, we're gonna talk about how the rebuilding. So what is the lesson from here? Every great empire, they goes through this cycle of growth. And then when the growth becomes in the top pinnacles, right? And then the corruption on the power struggle happens. And then the collapse starts. Then the civil war happens because they start fighting each other for the power. And subhanallah, and then if Allah wills, then there is a revival. So this is a valuable lesson for our time as well, same time. So Jazakallah khair for your time and your attention for this part 2. Inshallah, we'll come back with more in our part 3 session. Assalamu alaikum.